among us and historical perspective. And, you know, since we're in this beautiful Atlanta History Center, what a perfect backdrop for this discussion. And I certainly don't want to bore you this evening with a lot of facts and figures, but it is so important in weaving the story of the history of Filipinos and what they suffered and endured in their journey in becoming successful and contributing Filipino-Americans in every industry, in every part of society. There are approximately 19.4 million Asian Americans in the U.S., representing about 6% of the U.S. population. Asian Americans grew a whopping 46% from 2002 to 2014, and now we are recognized as the fastest growing minority group in America. Looking at this chart, aren't you so proud to see that the Filipinos are the second largest group of Asian Americans, not too far behind the Chinese? Now, even though I work very closely with a lot of Asian American communities, I find it almost shocking that Filipinos are the second largest group at 3.4 million people. Now, let me tell you why I say shocking. Let's be honest here, okay? We always hear a lot about the Chinese, we hear about the Japanese, and we hear about other Asian groups. But unfortunately, in my opinion, we don't hear, as much about our Filipino brothers and sisters. So, how is it that the Filipinos are often hidden in the shadows of other Asian Pacific Islanders, when yet they are the second largest group at 3.4 million? Well, today I hope to change that perception and bring to light just who are the Filipino-Americans, their struggles in getting to the shores of America and once here, what they endured here in the U.S., overcoming extreme adversity and discrimination, yet becoming a highly successful group, achieving remarkable contributions in every sector of American life. Now, let's take a look at the unique heritage of the Filipino-Americans. And I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but there may be others like me in the room who are not fully aware of how and when the Filipinos came to the U.S. Now, you know that we have all heard about the gold rush of 1848, when thousands of Chinese poured into California in search of their fortunes. We've heard that. We've also heard about the Chinese working on the railroads, and then the Japanese moving in as farmers to Hawaii and California, right? We're familiar with those stories. But I'm guessing that not many people in mainstream America know that the Filipinos were actually the first Asians to cross the Pacific Ocean as early as 1587. Now that's 50 years before the first English settlement of Jamestown was established, and I never heard that in my history classes here in DeKalb County when I grew up here. I never heard that. The first documented arrival was when the first Filipino seaman known as the Luzon arrived on a Spanish galleon in Morro Bay, California on October 18, 1587. And they were sent to California to claim the land for the Spanish king, as documented here on this monument. In 1763, Filipinos made their first permanent settlement in the bayous and marshes of Louisiana. As sailors and navigators on board Spanish galleons, Filipinos, also known as Manila men, jumped ship to escape the brutality and oppressive colonial conditions of their Spanish masters. And they built unique houses on these stilts along the Gulf ports of New Orleans. Filipinos were the first in the U.S. to introduce the sun-drying process of shrimp. They lived by fishing and catching alligators, and today Filipinos are still in New Orleans 8 to 10 generations later. In 1781, Antonio Miranda Rodriguez Poblador, along with 44 other Filipinos, was sent by the Spanish government from Mexico to establish what is now known as the city of Los Angeles. And there are an estimated 607,000 Filipinos in the LA area today, and as a matter of fact, there are more Filipinos than any other Asians in the state of California. During the War of 1812, the Manila men from New Orleans fought against the British with Jean Lafitte in the Battle of New Orleans. Now, looking back at the motherland for a minute here, it was noted earlier, for over 300 years, Spain had colonized the Philippines, using Manila Bay as their great seaport, trading silver and gold with other countries around the world. Now, in exchange for that gold, the Spaniards gave Filipinos Christianity. And they were called Filipinos after King Philip II of Spain. And that's why many have Spanish surnames like Bautista, Marquez, Enriquez, and Santos. The Philippine-Spanish connection came to an end after the Spanish-American War in 1898. In the Treaty of Paris, Spain sold the Philippines to the United States for $20 million, ending over 300 years of Spanish colonization. Filipinos have been celebrating their independence from Spain since June 12, 1898. And I don't want to be a party pooper here at today's celebration, but the people of the Philippines were not really free then. America was its new ruler and had cheated the Filipinos in believing that they were actually free. So the Philippine-American War began shortly after U.S. colonization, lasting for 4 years. And soon after the war, William Howard Taft, who later became President of the United States, became governor of the Philippines. American school teachers, called Thomasites, came to the Philippines to establish a public school system similar to American public schools. And that's why so many Filipinos speak English so well compared to other Asian groups. The elite class of rich Filipinos, known as pensionados, were allowed to come to the U.S. to study at American University, and in November of 1903, 103 pensionados became the first Filipino students to attend American University. So from 1906 to 1934, thousands of Filipinos began moving into California and Hawaii. And while the Philippines was a territory of the U.S., Filipinos were unrestricted from immigrating here to the U.S. And this wave of immigration has been referred to as the Manong generation. The majority of these immigrants were laborers. However, beginning in the 1920s and then exploding into the 1930s, sentiment against Filipinos took a nasty, hostile turn. During the Great Depression, Filipino-Americans were also affected and lost their jobs, therefore becoming the target of race-based violence. Some Americans claim that Filipinos brought down the standard of living because they worked for lower wages. This eventually led to the passing of the Tying-McDuffie Act of 1934, which limited Filipino immigration to the U.S. to just 50 people per year, when before, as you remember, it was unrestricted. The legislation's main purpose was to exclude Filipinos because they were perceived as a social problem, disease carriers, and an economical threat. But less than a decade later, there was a major shift in the American attitude toward the Filipinos with the onset of World War II. Why? Because Filipinos living in the Philippines joined the U.S. Navy to fight side by side with the Americans against the Japanese. They were allowed to join the Navy as non-officers because they were so-called nationals, even though they really were not officially American citizens. And more than 250,000 Filipino soldiers responded to President Roosevelt's call to arms and later fought under the American flag during World War II. Filipinos who had served in World War II had been given the option of becoming U.S. citizens, and about 10,000 people took that opportunity. And today, there are 9,689 Filipinos serving in the U.S. Navy in active duty. And this includes officers, enlisted personnel, and warrant officers as well. Now, after the 1965 Immigration Act, Filipinos began arriving in the U.S. for education, work, and to escape the repressive political regime of President Ferdinand Marcos. And this resulted in a significant brain drain of highly educated Filipinos. Unlike earlier immigrants, who were largely farm workers and military personnel, the new Filipino immigrants were professionals, and many of them from the medical fields. Filipino war brides were allowed to immigrate to the United States through the War Brides Act and Fiancé Act, with approximately 16,000 Filipinas entering the U.S. in the years following World War II. Many Filipinas of this new wave of migration came to the U.S. as professionals due to a shortage in qualified nurses. This wave of Filipinos was also called the brain drain. It consisted mainly of professionals, doctors, lawyers, nurses, engineers, as well as the military. So we've seen in this brief discussion how the Filipinos originally came to the U.S. to escape Spanish oppression, later as farm workers, military personnel, and then in the late 60s as sought-after professionals. We saw how the Filipino sentiment was at times extremely ugly, and now you are so respected, you are so revered. And I want to mention that Filipino-American History Month, or Heritage Month, is celebrated in the U.S. during the month of October. It was established in 1988 to commemorate the first recorded presence of Filipinos in the U.S., as you recall, on October 18, 1587. Wow. And you know how I started off by talking about the Filipino community being in the shadows of other Asian groups? After you see this next segment that I put together, I think you'll be like me and you'll say, oh my gosh, I had no idea just how many Filipinos have contributed to all walks of society. Because of time constraints, though, I can only include a few of the many, many Filipino heroes and celebrities in this next segment. But of course, you can look around in this room. Look around in this room and see some of the most notable, some of the most highly respected Filipinos in your community. I hope you enjoy this next segment.